Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely to be with you at this wonderful hotel. This is actually the room where the first ever United Nations meeting was held, so I'm told, many years ago. So we're in a place that is steeped in history. Quick question before we start. 114 years ago, almost to the day, does anybody know what happened? It was the establishment of FIFA. That's when the idea of Jules Rimet came to fruition, and FIFA was born in Rue Saint-Honore in Paris with just 6 members: France, Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, Spain and Sweden. Germany apparently joined via telegram later on in the day, but for some reason isn't considered a founding member. You won't be surprised to hear that Britain, of course, didn't want anything to do with those continentals, so it was probably the earliest form of Brexit. We tend to think of FIFA in those early days as perhaps being rather benevolent and apolitical and without stain, but there is a long history of controversy, particularly in the awarding of the World Cup hosting rights, which, of course, in 2010 became the catalyst by which FIFA was thoroughly, if belatedly, investigated in the modern era. I lifted this quote from a football website called Lee's Football Times. The selection of Italy in 1934 was fraught with political intrigue and rumours of intimidation and illegal payments. As early as 1930, an informal lobbying effort was undertaken by the Secretary of the Italian Federation, Giovanni Mauro, on behalf of the fascist government to assure FIFA that the government of Mussolini would underwrite any losses. This swayed the committee, who chose Italy ahead of Sweden. And of course, later on in FIFA's history, we had a World Cup in 1978 in Argentina, whilst there was a military junta in place. And the World Cup of 1982 in Spain was awarded in 1966 when Spain was still very much under the control of General Franco. Yet perhaps because these events happened in the time before the internet and social media and were essentially about power and politics rather than money, and perhaps because they occurred more so in the football heartlands of Europe and South America, they mainly passed through to the keeper without the scandals that we've seen today. But with the sport now a truly worldwide phenomenon, my esteemed journalistic colleague Tim Vickery asked this very valid question back in 2010. Is corruption in football merely an unwanted byproduct of the game's huge global success? When you generate oceans of money from sponsors and advertisers, is it inevitable that corruption follows? Are those who engage in these dark arts merely bad apples in an otherwise disease-free orchard? Or is it more systemic? Does it operate like a criminal enterprise without sufficient checks and balances? Is corruption endemic in FIFA in particular? And if it is it therefore destroying the game it was set up to protect and administer as a not-for-profit organisation? In short, does it undermine the beautiful game? And those are the sorts of questions we're going to seek to answer on our very first panel, which features 4 heavyweight voices on the subject. Let me introduce you to them. First, Damien Collins, who you've already met, is the Conservative MP for Folkestone and Hythe, the chair of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, and also one of the co-founders of the reform advocacy group New FIFA Now. In the wake of the New Dawn raids in Switzerland in 2015, Damien told reporters that if Russia and Qatar won their World Cup hosting rights on a corrupt process, then that process should be rerun. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Damien Collins. Secondly, Jérôme Champagne is a former French diplomat turned international football consultant who served at FIFA for 11 years in various roles. He stood as a rival candidate to Sepp Blatter in the FIFA presidential election in 2016. In 2015, Champagne said this: "If we continue along this track, it will be the capacity of FIFA to govern football that will be at stake. If we want to prevent football from being managed only by private interest, and if we want to correct the current imbalances, we need FIFA, and we need a strong one." Ladies and gentlemen, Jérôme Champagne. Thirdly, Hope Solo, the American goalkeeper who won 202 caps for her country, during which time she won a FIFA Women's World Cup and 2 Olympic gold medals. She was voted the world's best keeper on 4 consecutive occasions between 2012 and 2015. She is a passionate advocate of equal pay and equal treatment for the US women's national team in particular, and of course recently ran for the presidency of the US Soccer Federation. She is quoted as saying this in regard to her queries about how and why the Soccer United marketing company operated in the US. I started to get emails back that were complete attorney jargon, basically saying, Hope, this is above your pay grade. Basically, shut your mouth and play soccer. That's when I knew I was barking up a tree they didn't want me to bark up. Pretty soon after that is when the USSF fired me. Ladies and gentlemen, Hope Solo. And last but by no means least, Jamie Fuller, who's the reason many of us are here today for the launch of his Foundation for Sports Integrity. In his day job, Jamie is the chairman of sportswear company Skins. He is also one of the co-founders of New FIFA Now, a self-styled Bob Geldof of sport. Fuller told the Daily Telegraph in 2016 that if people in charge of sport are only interested in their own personal power games and money, then all the other great sporting stuff doesn't happen. There is an integral link between the two that binds them. Jamie Fuller, ladies and gentlemen.
That's proof that I didn't get to edit what he wrote.
You did vet it. Welcome, esteemed guests. Great to see you. Let me play devil's advocate for a moment in asking the opening question, and just pick up in part on that Tim Vickery quote that I mentioned in the intro. The accepted wisdom in football is that FIFA's problems can perhaps be traced back to the 1970s when João Havelange started to commercialise the game properly and truly globalised it. Many people around the world involved in football, perhaps because of the fact that FIFA used to be a very Eurocentric organisation, don't necessarily view FIFA in the same way that many of us do in the West. They see a FIFA that has provided unlimited funds for their football, provided them with a voice, strengthened their hand, modernised the game. Famously, João Havelange visited 86 countries when he campaigned for the FIFA presidency. So Stanley Rouse, the incumbent, didn't even bother to campaign. So do we then, perhaps in this part of the world, have merely a nostalgic view of the world, and by extension, FIFA? Perhaps it's us that needs to change. Damien.
Well, the issue, that would be fine if there weren't strings attached, and that's the problem. It's a deeply political organisation, and I say this as a politician. I mean, you used the expression yourself, said Stanley Rouse didn't campaign. Well, Stanley Rouse probably didn't think of FIFA as a political organisation where others realised it was. Others realised the game was that in a system where Panama has got as many votes as Portugal, and is as important, then actually the power in the organisation is from smaller nations. Now, I don't have a problem. If FIFA says, if FIFA believes its mission in football is to develop football around the world, to get more countries playing it with better facilities and to unite the world through playing football, I think that's a very noble ambition. If they want to facilitate the transfer of money from wealthy football nations to developing football nations, then I don't have a problem with that either. The issue here has been there's been no scrutiny, no real oversight of how that's been done, and it's been too easy for payments to be made to football officials in countries where the game is developing, people who've been able to enrich themselves through football, not because of anything they've done themselves commercially, but through people taking backhanders, and that's been the concern, and that around the World Cup bidding process, this process has been even more corrupted, with no proper scrutiny of what was going on. And one of the things when we started New FIFA Now, one of the things we called for and saying, well, it's easy just to say FIFA should change, but how should it change? And one of the key things was there'd be real scrutiny over how development money is spent within the game. When FIFA give money to a development project, is all that money actually spent on that project, or does it end up in the bank accounts of officials for no apparent reason? And that has been the problem. Therefore, this culture has developed, and it makes it very difficult for people to speak out, and it makes change difficult because so many people may have been compromised in some way or another because of their actions in the past. And I think, unfortunately, some of the leaders of FIFA have sought to exploit this, not necessarily to enrich themselves, although some of them may have done, but certainly to consolidate their power over the game. And it's that lack of transparency, the lack of scrutiny of what's gone on, that I think has allowed so many of these problems to fester over so many years. And I think we should care about it, because money that's been lost through corruption is money that's been taken away from some of the poorest countries and some of the poorest people who could enjoy this sport more.
I want to pick up on one of the words that you mentioned there, culture. Jerome, you were, as we say, involved in FIFA for many years. Was that the culture at the organisation?
First, I would like, if you allow me, jump back to your first question.
Please do.
And far from me to defend the military regime of Brazil. And as you know, in my diplomatic career, I served in Brasilia. It is clear that the military regime of Brazil tried to benefit from the global impact of Pelé and Brazil's victory in the World Cup in Mexico to reach the FIFA presidency. But I think we should not rewrite history. Stanley Roos lost for a lot of other reasons. As you know, he tried to find an accommodating solution for apartheid in South Africa. Twice, the South African Federation was suspended for racist apartheid reasons, and twice, Stanley Roos managed to find an excuse. Secondly, Stanley Roos refused to give African and Asian country and Oceanian country a direct entry to the World Cup 1966 in England, despite the fact that the world had changed. Independence in Africa had taken place, and as you know, African federations boycotted the World Cup 1966. So all what he said, and far from me to be here to defend João Blanche and the military regime of Brazil, but we should not rewrite history. And it was clear that the world had changed, and the Eurocentric, arrogant behavior of FIFA at that time highly contributed to the victory of João Blanche. Coming back to your point, I proudly served in FIFA during 11 years. And it's difficult to understand FIFA. I've seen FIFA and FIFA and FIFA without understanding how FIFA is structured and how FIFA functions. In my campaign, I tried to give an analogy. And again, I want to say very clearly, I'm not a sore loser. I'm very happy that I lost. My life is much better. But you cannot understand how FIFA functions if you don't analyze how it functions. Let me give you an analogy that everyone will understand. The American people elect the US president. He's let's say, a Democrat, to be a little politically incorrect. Is sworn in on Capitol Hill. He arrives at the White House, and he doesn't appoint his cabinet. The cabinet is already appointed. And he's appointed by a group of 15 state governors, mostly Republicans in that case. I could do it the other way around if you prefer. And this guy said, look, my state is independent from the federal government. You cannot tell me what to do. You cannot control me ethically. You cannot control my competitions. You cannot. But we are here to block you from implementing the policies you have been elected for and what you want to do. It's like that. And frankly, I served during 11 years. We didn't know, but we suspected things. And personally, I got fired in January 2010 because definitely I crossed some lines. But at the same time, FIFA wouldn't be in this situation if the knowledge of how it functions with the federal states, I mean the 50 states, the Confederation, played a role. And if you look at what happened, and I thank the FBI for what they've done, it's mostly a Confederation issue. And if you look at why the vote in December 2010 was so scandalous, it's because of Confederations voting or voting discipline. And so I think if we want to change the structure, we should first better understand how it functions internally.
In terms of that, you mentioned there the key word, the confederations. Jamie, your organisation, New FIFA Now, has made very in-depth studies of how FIFA operates. Do you think that's the main issue with...
Yeah, look, I challenge that statement by Jerome, that this is not a FIFA issue, this is a confederations issue. There's no question, both of them are engaged. And when we talk about the 22 men who sat around the table in December 2010, and voted for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups. These were all members of the FIFA Executive Committee. I think I'm right in saying, and I say it was 22, there should have been 24, but 2 had already been suspended for taking bribes before the vote, I think out of the 24, it's something like 18 or 19 of them have either been suspended, indicted, imprisoned, banned, whatever you like. It's very hard to argue that there wasn't a cultural issue within FIFA itself. That's not to say that there wasn't an issue with the confederations as well. And I understand the political shenanigans and machinations that go on between them. But Jerome, if you're saying that, oh no, it's not a problem with FIFA, it's all the confederations' fault.
No, but if I can say something, he's absolutely right. It's not trying to exonerate FIFA from its responsibility. And believe me, if I lost my job, it's because I criticized internally a few decisions. But I think it's the old pyramid which is in charge. For example, if you look at FAs, who are in some countries completely under the control of the governments, under the control of the professional leagues, control of private interest, we have an issue there. And these people from the federations elect the confederation representatives, and that's why we have a problem. Don't forget about the reforms in 2013, and I want to quote Mr. Pitt, who was in charge of these reforms, and he tried to impose reforms, notably that the FIFA Independent Ethics Committee, at that time the committee was really independent, to control the confederation. The confederations refused. So again, you're right, but I'm not wrong neither.
and also, let me just add also, the pyramid structure, the organisation that sits at the top, and the person that sits at the top of the organisation that sits at the top, the president, is there to show leadership. And if you don't start with that person and that organisation and that council or executive committee being prepared to show the sort of vision and leadership that needs to happen, because you're right, it doesn't stop at confederations. It goes down to the federations. We have a rotten structure.
Yes.
Hope, I want to ask you as a player, and you are still a player, you're not retired yet, you're carrying on?
I did not officially retire.
Okay. Obviously there is, such a stain around the game at the moment, off the field, certainly more than on the field, but do players have perhaps more of a responsibility? You've been a big advocate of speaking out on key issues that we'll come to in a moment, but on the corruption around FIFA, if indeed that is the truth, do players have more of a responsibility to speak out on these issues? Because really the fans and the public, they listen to players, don't they, more than anybody else. Administrators can talk till they're blue in the face, but if a Leo Messi or a Cristiano Ronaldo, a Hope Solo, stands up and says, look, this is not right, we have to do something about this, then surely we have more chance of reform.
Absolutely, and I welcome more players to stand up and speak out. Unfortunately, there's pressure. You can see what happened in my case where I fought for equal pay, which in America is federal law. You look around the world and a lot of people say women shouldn't get paid the same as men in football because essentially they're not bringing in as much money. In America, it's two different scenarios. One, it's federal law, and two, we actually, as the women's team, bring in more money than our men's team. And I fought for this, and I got fired. So US Soccer made an example out of me. Best goalkeeper in the world, proven myself time and time again, and FIFA remained silent. Silent. They celebrated me, and then the moment when they could have come to show leadership that we talk about, they were quiet. There was a reform presented to the Brazilian Federation by 8 of the top players in Brazil, saying we're treated like second-class citizens, we have horrible playing fields, we have bad trainers, bad doctors, we have no opportunity to build the game from the grassroots level. And they presented this reform to the Brazilian Federation and said, if you don't fix this, the sexism, the chauvinism, if this doesn't change, we will not participate anymore. 8 of the top players from around the world. And the Brazilian Federation let them go. And once again, FIFA remained quiet. So if we want to talk about the pyramid structure, it starts at the top, and they can provide so much more leadership for all of the federations, yet they've remained quiet time and time and time again, especially when it comes to women's issues.
You were essentially put in the naughty corner, weren't you, and told to keep quiet. I'm interested to know if you got a lot of support from your fellow professionals, both female and male. Were they supportive of you publicly or privately, both or neither?
It was a very difficult situation. We had to file with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in the United States a complaint saying, look, US Soccer is not abiding by federal law. Please, we shouldn't have to push this through the court system. This law was passed 60 years ago, and yet it's not implemented 60 years ago, and we're still being forced through the court system to fight for our lawful rights. And once again, FIFA remains silent. US Soccer makes us go through the court system, spends millions of dollars to fight this case. And essentially, my teammates would call me and text me and show support. But ultimately, if they wanted to remain playing on the US team, they could no longer speak about this publicly. So I became kind of the outcast a little bit. And I understand, you have young players, you have players who, more than anything, are passionate about the game. They want to win, they want to play in World Cups, they want to play in Olympics. They want to represent their country. And, when I was 17 years old, that's all I could think about as well. But these issues are so much more bigger, and the way the world is going is trending right now. It's a time for women empowerment. You're seeing women in more leadership roles, yet it's still against a backdrop of inequality and male chauvinism and sexism. So we're fighting against it, and I do believe that we're on the right side of history, but we're up against many challenges day in and day out.
Simon, can I?
Please do.
I think Hope is underselling herself a little bit when she talks about the US women's team brings in more money than the men's team by a significant amount. What she didn't say is the US women's team is paid 1/4 of the men's team. So whilst in most places around the world, the women are paid less because they're bringing in less money, this bizarre situation is a complete reverse. And then you add in, you revealed a few months ago some inappropriate touching from, someone senior within FIFA.
Yeah, well,
which is indicative. And I'm not trying to put you...
Besides all that, I'll give you some numbers. In 2015, the women's team for US Soccer brought in $20 million. The men's team had negative $2 million. Negative $2 million. The women brought in a surplus of $20 million, and yet we get paid 25 cents to the dollar, even though it's federal law. In 2016, in ticket sales alone, we brought in $5 million, and the men lost $1 million. So there really is, there's a law in America that says you cannot discriminate based off of gender, yet we still have discrimination everywhere you look. And the comments I brought up about there is sexual harassment within sport. You see it in USA Gymnastics. Obviously, it's all over the world right now. But this is a systemic problem. And the line is blurred. We have trainers, doctors, even our own teammates. This is an issue that needs to be addressed, but it's not just with men, it's with women as well. There has to be a line that we all know not to cross. And even though, it came up with Sepp Blatter, it is systemic. And I don't think there was any harm intended by Sepp Blatter, but this is just something that happens that women athletes have to deal with time and time again.
I want to stick with the same theme, but broaden it out to everybody else as well. FIFA recently held their conference for equality and inclusion. Obviously, we have a female general secretary now, Fatima Samora. There are 6 women in total on the 37-strong FIFA Council. Is that enough? Are FIFA doing enough, or is this just window dressing? Damien.
Well, they're important steps forward, but I think there's a lot more that could be done. FIFA is not just the governing body of men's football, it's the governing body of all football as well. So women have been largely underrepresented in the leadership of football. There's a problem with football as well. The two groups also that are massively underrepresented in football are fans and the players. That actually, if you strip football, what is it? Where's the money come from? It comes from the fans and it comes from the players, and they're massively underrepresented as well. And I think a lot of these governance issues also reflect a lack of a voice of maybe recently retired players, people that understand the pressures of the modern game, pressures athletes face.
There are only 5 former footballers on the FIFA Council.
And I think as well, hearing Hope talk, it reminded me very much of the issue we looked at, which was the FA's treatment of Eni Aluko. Now, I think if there had been more more women on the FA board, more recent players who understood some of these issues, I'd like to believe the FA would have handled it differently than they did. They certainly didn't. They certainly didn't give her a fair process for her complaints to be examined. So I think there are, again, these go back to cultural issues within the sport, and a lot of sport, particularly football, is largely run by a number of people who never played at the elite level, who are institutionalised, who've been there a long time, and just want to keep things as they are. And I think that that is a disservice to many of the athletes that play it.
Anything to add on that, Jerome or Hope or Jane?
Yeah, I wanted to just make one comment. For the longest time, I've been angry when women have been appointed to jobs, for instance, the commissioner of the Women's Professional League. They were appointed by male officials, by Sunil Gulati, the president of US Soccer, former president of US Soccer. And these women are puppets. They do what US Soccer wants them to do. They do what male figures want them to do. And last night we had a great conversation, and Jerome had this brilliant quote for me, and it made me think about things a little bit differently, and I would love for you to share that quote.
First, I would like to jump on what the question. I served during 11 years between January 99 to January 2010. I was never really exposed to women's football, and my first wow impression when I attended the World Cup, the Women's World Cup in the United States in 99, I said, wow, it's better than men's football? Even though technically, for example, you don't see, at that time it has changed, but at that time it was rare to see a 30-yard shot. It was more difficult. We saw less, for example, balls with a header, this kind of, it has changed now because the level has increased tremendously. But it was so impressive, the ambience in the Pasadena Stadium. I was there, it was absolutely incredible. I had the luck to be in a VIP lounge besides Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. It was an amazing moment. And the final movement of Brandy Chastain at the end personified the fact that football had been changed forever on that day. And I'm very proud because, and I say that because there was a lot of change. The creation of the World Cup under 20, the creation of the World Cup for girls under 17, the fact that it was after I was fired, but in 2012, Blatter had a reform imposing the first co-opted woman. But of course, it's not enough. Coming back to what Hope said about yesterday, in the 70s in France, we had this French female journalist, editor-in-chief of the weekly L'Express, which was more or less what Time magazine in the US, Françoise Giroud. And she said, we will have progress on gender equality when incompetent women like incompetent men will be appointed to important positions.
You have to start somewhere.
So we have to start somewhere. But I can tell you in my years, when I was in FIFA, in my years at the diplomats around the world during 15 years, and in my years as a consultant, I've seen amazing women as football administrators. For example, I want to mention the name of Lindia Nsekera. She was the president of the Federation of Burundi, great woman involved in football, but she was marginalized sometimes, including at continental level, because she was too strong, because she was too independent. And the African Confederation tried everything to set her aside, including when Blatter proposed her to the IOC and proposed her to be co-opted. So I think we need to do more, but we have to be also, as Hope has said, extremely realistic.
Okay. I'd like to move away with respect from gender issues just for a moment, if I can. And Jerome, I'd like to stick with you. As we mentioned, that you stood as a FIFA presidential candidate. As a preemptor to that, in 2012, you issued a 26-page document, which was entitled "Which FIFA for the 21st Century," which contained 7 challenges for the game. I want to pick out one, which is probably at the nub of the whole argument, really. The relationship of football with money, between the need of it, you wrote, and the dangers of its excesses. Is that the whole key to the problem with the game in the 21st century? If you were my 13-year-old son, you would say, "Papa, don't tell me I told you so." But the reality that at that time, I'd been fired 2 years before, and I decided to say, we cannot continue. Look what's going on. I just want to give you 1 or 2 examples. When Europe was divided by the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall, European football was united. It was possible for the Real Madrid of Franco Spain to play with the Partizan Belgrade of Tito's Yugoslavia without diplomatic relations, and both sides were competitive. Look at what happened today. Europe is united, we have the EU, but we have dissolved the Iron Curtain and replaced it by the Money Curtain. And the Money Curtain is, for even year by year, more elitist competition. Today, according to the CIS analysis, the Champions League is today the most unequal competition in Europe, except maybe the Cypriot League and maybe the Albanian one, with the highest percentage of matches ending with a 3-goal difference. So we have an issue. If you think that the club finishing last in the English Premier League makes more money alone than the 18 clubs of the Dutch Eredivisie, if you think at my first country, France, where the budget of Paris Saint-Germain alone is bigger than the total of the budget of the club, having the second budget, of the club having the third budget, and the club having the fourth budget. So think about the world. Where I live in Zurich, close to my home, you have more good football field than the entire Democratic Republic of Congo. So football is no different from the world. The world is becoming unequal, unfair, more and more controlled by the economic and political interest. Football is no different. So I took the initiative in 2012 to do that. And as you know, my motto in my campaign was rebalance the game in the 21st globalized century. I got 7 votes, that's fine. But the reality is today, we are there.
inequalities, what I call the NBAization of football, is growing. FIFA is less and less powerful to govern the game with the winds of political interference, all these things. Just think about the head of state of one of the bidding countries for 26 threatening others if they don't vote. Of course, it's normal that the head of state of a bidding country since 1929 defend his bidding, but we have never seen that. And last but not least, the fact that the Europeanization of the game is growing, and that's extremely dangerous. And so that's why I wrote this paper, but I got 7 votes.
Damien, football has to want to change, though, doesn't it? Back as long ago as 2011, you urged the English FA to take the lead in insisting on a proper inquiry into the shenanigans at FIFA, and yet really it wasn't until the FBI came in and did their thing in 2015 that we got a proper and thorough scrutiny of what had gone on. Why, I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway, why is there such resistance from the game to investigate its own affairs? I mean, after all, FIFA is officially a not-for-profit organisation. It exists as a Verein in Switzerland, I think that's the right term, which is a charity status. So really it should have nothing to hide in terms of its finances, at least, you'd think.
Well, I mean, they've never opened the finances up, so I suppose we still don't know what they have to hide, not entirely. The trouble is the politics of football. David Bernstein, as chairman of the FA, made a stand at the FIFA Congress meeting, spoke out criticising the Blatter regime. There are many people in English football who are highly embarrassed by what he did and felt that it's taken years to try and recover the damage that did, that they don't want to rock the boat within FIFA, they don't want to rock the boat within UEFA. It's just not what you do. And I think and in terms of English football itself, I think, and I've said a lot over the years about the way in which English football needs to reform. I think particularly over the lack of real bite it has to keep bad owners of clubs out of the game. But who run the Premier League is the dominant force in English football. It's the dominant commercial force. It has massive influence over the whole of football in this country for that reason, because so much of its money goes into grassroots football. Again, people don't want to rock the boat and disturb that. And so you say, who actually runs football in this country? It is the majority of the chairmen of the clubs in the Premier League. They run football, and they run football in this country. And then you look at I think what Jerome talks about the way European football is going. It would be a perfectly logical extension of where we are now to see football in Europe becoming like the NFL, of the 24-team franchise of the globally most successful commercial clubs just playing each other, and everything else being a junior tournament. That is the logical consequence of the direction in which we're heading. And well,
we're heading down that way, aren't we?
But who's making...
report last week in The Guardian saying that they're trying to integrate a European Super League being led by Andrea Agnelli at Juventus.
But who's making those decisions? Is it the fans? Is it the players? No, it's just made by a relatively small group of people who are doing it for commercial reasons, and there's no one who really can stand up to them. And I think that is now you might say actually with Platini, who gets criticism of lots of other things. I mean, we wouldn't have financial fair play in this country if it wasn't for UEFA. I mean, the Premier League didn't want to do it. They were forced to do it because UEFA insisted on it. But that was done partly to try and arrest the commercial success of the Premier League in this country. But it was a reform. But I think sadly, we'll never again see. I was watching that film, the old film, I Believe in Miracles, about Brian Clough's Nottingham Forest. Will we ever see a Nottingham Forest versus Malmo Champions League final? I mean, never. Those days are gone. And so that means there are large parts of European football in particular that could have aspired to elite success if their club was the best at everything it did, but I recognise now that is never going to happen. I mean, probably unless Ajax is bought by some very wealthy individual, Ajax will never win the European Cup again.
Jamie, the one attempt by the game to investigate itself, if you like, certainly at FIFA level, was of course the Garcia report, which large swathes of which were hidden for a long time until Bild leaked it publicly. What are your views on that report? I'm sure you've read it, fine-tooth comb, every line. Is it just a whitewash, a waste of time and effort, or are there things in there that really we should still be pursuing? Does it still hold any relevance even today?
Yeah, and look, Simon, I know we've got the next panel is specifically talking about the World Cup bidding process, but it would be silly not to mention the elephant in the room because, the core of this collapse and the scandal revolves around that decision taken in December 2010. And without wanting to steal the thunder of the next panel, you've got what was at very best a bizarre decision. And you couple that with your previous question about money. I mean, I still cannot interpret that decision any other way than where did the money go? Because it wasn't like the decision was by far the most financially proficient decision for FIFA. It wasn't like FIFA was going to make a huge amount of money as opposed to the other countries that were being offered. So I think that there are things in Garcia that need to be explored, and I think that'll be talked about later on in one of the other panels. I personally believe Garcia was a whitewash. I think Garcia was set up to do the bare minimum. The idea of, if take Russia for example, that, I'm sorry, the dog ate my homework. We've got our computers, oops, they've gone and I'm sorry, we can't back them up. You know, it beggars belief that FIFA would accept that. And I think that in turn asks some major questions about that. And then again, the lack of severe interrogation on the Qatar issue to really dig deep, and I believe the lack of desire to dig deep is quite terrifying. And so on any measure, I don't know how you can justify, and again, I don't want to say too much, but these guys are the experts, and I'm interested in what their opinion is, how you can justify making those decisions based on what? Damien,
Well, I mean, you forget the other elephant in the room, you know, 'cause there are quite a few of the Garcia report, the Spain-Portugal bid just flat refused to cooperate with the investigation.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, they didn't even have an excuse. They just said, we're not going to. And they had also no power to interview consultants on the bids, only people who were football officials. And the issue was the consultants. It was people employed at arm's length working on behalf of the bids, where that's the area that needed to be investigating. And of course, the failure was not only did the executive summary of the Garcia report bear very little relation to what was in the report itself, but then for FIFA to say, well, we've had a rigorous investigation and there's no issue here. I mean, Garcia never had those powers, and it just shows you that FIFA's intent was not to get to the bottom of the problem. It was a PR exercise. It was distraction to give the impression that they wanted to uncover corruption if it was there, but actually they knew from the start off that no matter what Michael Garcia did, he was never going to be in a position to do that.
Hope, Jerome, anything to add on that?
I'm not the moderator, but you as a journalist, I would like to ask you, what do you think about the current process for 26? With a lot of political interference, a lot of unregulated globalization, a lot of pressure to favor the big money. And again, I don't want to interfere, but if you look at 2018, when you look at 2018, and again, it's not about what happened, but just think about one thing. As long as the World Cup was coming back to Europe, as long as the fact that Germany had it twice, France had it twice, Italy had it twice, Spain had it once, the UK had it once, Sweden had it once, it was a logical prospect to go to Russia. You know, the Football Federation of Russia came into FIFA as a member in 1912 at the time of the Tsarist Empire. So again, I'm not defending what happened, but I think if we conceive football in the globalization, we have to consider that everyone has the right to organize it.
Yeah, but Jerome, sorry, how do you justify the loss of the computers?
Listen, I'm not here to defend the Russians or to interfere in that, because as you know, I was fired before. What I want to tell you is that it's logical. Why would we have a bidding process if we decide that the only thing which matters is the number of billions of dollars which will end up in FIFA's pocket at the end? So let's cancel and let's decide that the World Cup will only go to UK, France, Germany, and the United States. So my question to you, what do you think about the current process and the fact that our FIFA is handling the 26-bit system?
As a journalist, I couldn't possibly comment.
You cannot have it both ways.
Exactly. My apologies for cutting short this particular part of the discussion, but I'm aware that we've got about 10 or 11 minutes left of this particular conversation. I want to take us forward, which follows on quite logically, to the next area of discussion, and that is the FIFA of today and the future. Specifically, has it changed under the leadership of Gianni Infantino? And I just want to play the room an audio file of a recording of a FIFA Executive Committee meeting involving Infantino and several of his cohorts in Mexico in 2016. This audio grab is of Infantino discussing the salary he'd been offered by the head of the Compensation Committee and the man charged with drawing up the reforms upon which Infantino's presidency was to be based. That is Domenico Scala. So here's Gianni Infantino talking now.
Today, as of today, I have no contract with FIFA. I don't have a contract. I didn't sign a contract. Contract was proposed to me by the chairman of the Audit and Compliance Committee. I did not accept this proposal. It was a proposal which I found insulting. It was less than half of what the previous president was earning. Of what the previous president was earning the last year. Last year was published 3.6 million. The offer that was made to me was less than half of this amount.
That's the words of Gianni Infantino. Just before I get the reaction of the panel, we have a second audio clip of one of his executives that is around the table in this discussion, discussing just what is to be done with Domenico Scala. Have a listen.
Where, Mr. President and my dear colleagues, the issue about the chairman of the Audit and Compliance Committee. I would like just to bring the attention to all the executive members that 6 confederations, the whole confederations, have signed a letter asking the chairman to step down.
So, interesting. Infantino then sent an email to the chairman of FIFA's legal committee, Marco Villiger, with orders to delete the recording you just heard. And the upshot of all of that was that Scala resigned from his position in May 2016 after FIFA members passed new rules to allow the new FIFA Council to appoint and dismiss members of independent committees. And Scala is quoted in The Guardian as saying this: "This undermines a central pillar of the good governance of FIFA and destroys a substantial achievement of the reforms." FIFA later claimed Scala had misinterpreted their decision. Do you buy that, Damien?
No, of course not. I mean, there's been a concerted effort since Infantino became president to limit the powers of these committees, and they've driven good people out of the organisation for asking awkward questions. Domenico Scala is one of them. Last autumn, we had Miguel Maduro give evidence to my select committee, where he again felt like he'd been forced out of the organisation for, he was asking the right questions about Russia and why the Russian sports minister was a member of the FIFA Executive Committee, given that you're not supposed to have those dual political roles, and was told by the Secretary General that if he carried on pursuing this, he would ruin the World Cup in Russia, and was basically told to back off. So they don't want that kind of scrutiny, and they've done everything they can to undermine it and drive out people that ask difficult questions.
Hope, when you hear that audiogram that we just heard, and you fought so hard for equal pay, and you hear the FIFA president saying, well, I'm only getting half of what the last guy was on and it's not enough. Honestly, how does that make you feel?
It's all too familiar. When I ran for the president of US Soccer, these issues are no different. Lack of transparency, buying votes from state associations and delegates, making promises to play national team games in their particular states, backdoor deals, lack of transparency. It's a nonprofit organization. They're not accurately reporting their income. I believe U.S. Soccer made from Copa America, they made $65 million, and they only $65 million, and they only reported $50 million. So there's all sorts of issues, and once again, it's no different than what FIFA is leading. They're showing this example for all of the rest of the federations. And I saw it as I ran for president of US Soccer. It's demeaning, it's sad. All this money is supposed to be going to grassroots. It's supposed to be developing the game in America. Soccer's become the rich white kid sport. It costs families $15,000 a year to play soccer. They're alienating the Hispanic communities, the Latino communities. It's no different than what FIFA's doing. The money is going to the richer countries, to the richer clubs, and it's not getting funneled down to where we need it the most.
Jerome, I know we talked before we came into the auditorium today, and you felt that FIFA today has almost returned back to the days of being a Eurocentric organisation, and in many ways, perhaps worse today than it was in the days of Sepp Blatter.
Can I use the Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution?
No.
Your question is very interesting. I think more than ever, we need strong media freedom. We need strong investigative journalism, because we can see clearly that, and I don't want to mention any name, we entered in a world of post-truth, We entered in a world where important meetings are organized in countries where we know the main specialist journalists of media and agencies will not travel because they have stringers or correspondents. So big sport organizations have their meetings in exotic destinations. But the reality is that the journalists asking the question at the post-event press conference do not know anything about these shenanigans. So we have a kind of a lukewarm propaganda. More than ever, we need, and here we have Eric Champel of France Football, and France Football did an amazing job in French language to reveal what took place inside FIFA and in French football. But they were told, look, we stopped this trend. We're just going to focus on reporting on the previous weekend's results. So my reaction to your question is that more than ever, our democracies, as citizens of the world and some countries, we need more journalists investigating that. And we need more whistleblowers, and Bonita, I really appreciate what you did. And I think we need more people like that, because if not, it will be worse. We're in an era of post-truth.
Indeed. I want to finish off this panel chat because we're almost out of time. Just to get your thoughts on Gianni Infantino's recently revealed plans to reshape football for the next 20 years with the 48-team World Cup, the 24-team FIFA Club World Cup. Are these best practice for the game, or is this just about earning more money again to keep the stakeholders happy financially? Jamie?
Can I chuck another thing in there as well?
Please do.
Because we keep talking about the money, and we know that there are some things are too late, but having seen the sort of behaviour of the current, what's meant to be the reformed FIFA, being very clear that we don't have a reformed FIFA, it's just the same old with a different name. There are still questions that stand out about 2022 and the allocation of 2022. And you mentioned, and Damien, when you mentioned you read Damien's bio about his statement that, you know, if stuff continues to come out, serious questions, or not serious questions, but it needs to be taken away. I wonder what Mr. Infantino, if there is an intention to do anything on behalf of FIFA, should more information come out. And if there is an intention to do something, what do you do? I mean, I saw Damien yesterday and he had an interesting idea about 2022. Damien, do you want to share that?
Well, yeah, just, I mean, as I said before, if there's evidence of corruption, then I don't think the bid should be allowed to stand. And just because a few years have passed now since that bid was awarded, that decision can still be made, I think, even at short notice. And one way of doing it, if it was controversial that any one nation should be the beneficiary of that, would be maybe to use the format for the 2020 Euros and use that as the format for a 2022 World Cup if that was required. It's a system that will have been run and tested, but certainly, and I've said this all the way along, if there is evidence of corruption that is exposed, then clearly that decision couldn't be allowed to stand.
But in the current climates, surely the game seems to have no appetite to revisit that. You know, it's akin to the child in the playground sticking his fingers in his ears going, la, la, la. They don't want to revisit that and even look for evidence. But
the sports never do. I mean, you could go look at look at doping. Look at something completely different. Look at the McLaren investigation for WADA into doping in Russia. The IAAF, the IOC would never have. They might say, well, WADA's the proper body. They would never have driven that process. It was done to them. And it'll be the same with this. If evidence of corruption is found, it won't be found by FIFA. It'll be found by an investigator. It'll be found by a law enforcement agency. And it'll be put to them in such a way that they can't not respond because it's become an undeniable fact. But one of the failures of sport constantly is that this pressure for change, the exposure of wrongdoing, largely comes from outside bodies and outside individuals speaking out, not from the organisations themselves, because the organisations are set up to protect themselves. And I think at the first sign of trouble, they run for cover.
Okay. Closing thoughts, Jerome?
Yeah, your question regarding the World Cup, Club World Cup. You have to remind people that the title of World Club Champion was given only by 2 continent clubs until 2000. Now, the formula is not very satisfying, but at least it exists. The new formula with 24 teams, including 12 from Europe, with only 2 from Africa, 2 from Asia, 2 from North and Central America, is obviously biased. It's even more biased if you consider that it will be organized with 8 groups of 3 clubs, and with the only the first one of each group to qualify to the quarterfinal, which means very clearly that in 9 out of 10 tournaments with that format, we will have 8 European clubs in the round of 8. So with the word world, if it's finally a kind of super tournament like the one organized by Charles Stilitano in the United States, except that it will have a stamp of FIFA. And in fact, a lot of continents are in football, like in the rest of the world, providing of raw material which are valorized by Europe or by the industrialized country. It is a situation for South America and Africa. So at the end of the day, more money will go to some European teams, but at the end, the gap with the rest of the world, despite FIFA investment in development, has widened. So this kind of format will be just another exhibition tournament, which will give more money to the ones who are already wealthy.
Hope you get the final word.
Oh, goodness. I'm a pessimist, I guess, but I want to hope that things will get better and change. But when I keep company like this around me, it makes it very difficult. But I will say, Jamie, thank you for putting this on, because this is a step in the right direction. And I think we have to educate a lot of people. I think we have to continue these conversations. And I do kind of want to put the responsibility, just like Jerome said, on our journalists as well, because they're a huge part of this problem.
It's all your fault.
It's all on us.
No.
If we're allowed to.
No.
If we're allowed to.
Work more.
Okay, unfortunately, our time is up, ladies and gentlemen. We could talk about this for about the next 8 hours, I think, and I think we're going to in different panels. But in the meantime, can you please thank Damien Collins, Hope Solo, Jerome Champagne, and Jamie Fuller. And we're going to take a short comfort break of about 15 minutes, and then we'll see you back in the auditorium for panel 2 with David Eads.